Your second speaker, here we go, Heidi Riebel.
Several years ago, while facing burnout as a mental health clinician, I thought it was time to do something more fun. Taking the advice of a friend who knew me as a runner, motorcyclist, guitar player, and wine lover, I decided to pursue a walk-on spot as a PhD student in the Leisure Studies department. I would write a dissertation. Early on, I noticed that discussions in the discipline centered on health and wellness concerns related to sedentary lifestyles. Walking was often part of those discussions. It was ordinary, ubiquitous, for many a physical activity requiring no special equipment. This got my attention. As I meandered through coursework, I learned that walking was the most commonly reported adult leisure time activity, was strongly promoted for its health benefits, and yet obesity rates were still trending upward. I wondered, how could this be? What was missing? In a consumer culture class, alongside the health and wellness courses, I was introduced to the romantic and philosophical writings on walking by Charles Baudelaire and Walter Benjamin, the flaneur. I became fascinated with walking as a lived aesthetic experience, a view of people who walked as other than a pound of flesh. The flaneur, a product of 19th century consumer culture, was characterized as the casual urban wanderer endowed with uncanny perceptive abilities. This resonated with me. This kind of walking, other than walking for exercise, was grounded in leisure time and lived in transient moments. I believed that there must be something special about walking. At this point in my studies, I was obsessed with the possibility of linking literary ideas on walking to health and wellness efforts. Then it caught my eye, a rambling footnote in a book on history of walking, referencing questions as to why people walk, how they walk, and whether they walk. That was it, the beginning of my research. An analytic essay on urban walking by Honoré de Balzac, written in 1833 in Paris and in French. I decided to take on translating a theory of walking into English. What could a famous realist author tell us that might fill in the gaps regarding understanding the humanness of walking? My fun began. I took trips to Paris for research and there accessed historic resources, took French classes at Alliance Française, and spent time in libraries utilizing 1830s dictionaries. Balzac wrote that walking shows and tells us everything about a person. I spent time lingering in the shopping arcades of the flaneur, which were also part of Balzac's landscape, near streets where he observed people for his study. I stood in his city, looked as he might look, day after day. Grounding myself in the Paris pedestrian culture, walking miles on the cobblestone streets where Balzac walked. I was the human pedestrian observer, the scavenger of social artifacts, moving incognito through the cityscape of Paris. I spent time at Maison de Balzac, saw the room, the desk where he wrote, and drank copious amounts of coffee. I took notes translated. Balzac profoundly illustrated through broad creative observation and writing that walking was the human condition. His 12 axioms or truths about walking were ideas centered on beauty, slow movement, the body, and walking as writing on the landscape. At this point, I felt that embedded in the walk were sensory, ethereal fragments of lived experience, space created by the synchronicity of body and mind that could be meaningful to now. I wanted to take this further, to bring the past to bear on the present. So, I took Balzac to New York City. I developed questions from the axioms and interviewed New York City walkers who walked long for its own sake. They walked because they loved to walk. Their ideas perambulated themes harmonious with Balzac's. They spoke of qualities to walking such as rhythm and form, movement as physical narrative, and space for noticing. They talked of urban walking as a means of knowing themselves, making connections to their history. Leisure walking brought tangible awareness, connecting past to present. These were slowed pace, reflexive vulnerability, receptivity. They noticed a wakeful openness foregrounded by slowing down. The New York City walkers talked of walking as born of desire, as giving them new eyes in a familiar landscape. They noticed heightened embodied sensibilities related to smells, sounds, sights, and rhythms which came to them in fleeting moments of gleeful surprise. These walkers talked of walking as full of wonder, joy, discovery, and hope. Leisure walking shows us the space in between that allows for knowing ourselves and to see familiar things in our world anew. Even in a hectic city, there are simple moments of awareness. There's a potential for enlightening others to the prospect of slowing down, noticing connections, and finding wonder in the everyday acts of ordinary people. Slowing down our feet, we create a small shift away from the spinning thoughts in our heads and multitasking lives. Lived experience in everyday walking is taken for granted, but full of potential meaning just by noticing. Meaningfulness is not dependent on spectacular events, 10,000 steps. It only requires noticing small epiphanies. The lived experience found in leisurely urban walking has no answers, but gives us the creative space to hear the questions. In considering non-productive walking as valuable in its impact on health and wellness, everyone's moments matter. Walking was meaningful to Balzac, to the New York City walkers, and is meaningful to leisure studies. Let's return to the art of walking, the beauty, the desire, the feeling, the pleasure of one's body in motion, found in just walking out the front door. Give credence to appreciation of small moments, to individual narrated perceptions and meanings when considering health and wellness. For meaningful lived experience is born of slow time, 2 feet and sky above, of leisure. Thank you.